Chapter 17. The Edict of Milan. The word liturgy comes from the Greek leitos, public, plus ergon, work. Religion was in antiquity an aspect of the public work of the state, its attempt to ensure good rapport with gods and men alike. It was the function of religion to be the social cement of the state. Centrality in the cosmos belonged not to the gods, but to the state, the divine human order. Because the state was the central religious institution, and in many cases the only one, the meaning of man's life was comprehended in the state. To be a stateless man was to be separated not only from the religious community, but from religion itself. The life of man was defined by the state, which appointed the bounds of his habitation and life. For the Christian, there can be no life outside of God. We live and move and have our being in Him. Acts 17:28. When a Greek made that statement, he saw God as the complex of directions in universal being which came to focus in the state. For the Christian, God is not an entelechy of being, but the creator of the universe and separate from it. For him, the life of man is comprehended by God, not by the state. God transcends the natural order, and man, created in the image of God, Genesis 1:26-28, must never see himself as comprehended by nature. His law comes from God, not from himself or the natural world, and hence God is his lawgiver, not the state. God gives his law to the state, the church, man, the family, the school, and all the created order. Because of this theological fact, religious freedom could be a fact in Israel, but not under paganism. On the other hand, paganism could not tolerate religious freedom, for to do so was to undermine its concept of the state and civil government. It could only grant religious toleration and establishment. Toleration and establishment are different aspects of a single fact. The state, which assumes that it has the prerogative to govern and control religion as the sovereign will by the varying edicts of toleration, establish that religion. It can in fact establish many religions, as did Rome. However, since toleration is a legal fact, that which is tolerated is thereby established by state power. Rome showed great toleration towards a variety of foreign religions, all with the stipulation that Rome's priority, sovereignty, and jurisdiction were recognized. As a result, every licit or legally licensed religion concealed the priority, sovereignty, and prior jurisdiction of Rome. All became subcults to the cult of Rome. They were tolerated and therefore established. As such, these subcults helped provide the social cement so important to Rome's empire. Rome's supervision over these religions was usually indulgent because, given their subordination to Rome, their successful operation could aid the social cohesion so important to Rome. All, by their establishment, contributed to the cult of emperor worship. For all but the Christians, such an arrangement simply meant sound social order and control. As a result, the Christians were persecuted as enemies of the state and of mankind. Tertullian, in his Apology, denied that Christians were, quote, the most guilty of men, end quote. Rather, they were the most law-abiding citizens, a people who prayed for their emperor and were faithful and honest subjects. Apology 2:29-32, AD 197. This argument was not convincing to Rome. For the empire, good citizenship meant less moral honesty and more a religious subservience to the genius of Rome. When the persecution ended with the Edict of Milan in March 313, a major step towards freedom was taken. Other religions were to continue as before, tolerated. The Church was to be free. Lactantius gives us the text of the edict. Quote, when we, Constantine and Licinius, emperors, had an interview at Milan and conferred together with respect to the good and security of the commonweal, it seemed to us that, among those things that are profitable to mankind in general, the reverence paid to the divinity merited our first and chief attention, and that it was proper that Christians and all others should have liberty to follow that mode of religion which to each of them appeared best, so that God, who is seated in heaven, might be benign and propitious to us and to everyone under our government, and therefore we judged it a salutary measure, and one highly consonant to right reason, that no man should be denied leave of attaching himself to the rites of the Christians, or to whatever other religion his mind directed him, that thus the supreme divinity, to whose worship we freely devote ourselves, might continue to vouchsafe his favour and beneficence to us. And accordingly we give you to know that, without regard to any provisos in our former orders to you concerning the Christians, all who choose that religion are to be permitted, freely and absolutely, to remain in it, and not to be disturbed anyways or molested. And we thought it fit to be thus special in the things committed to your charge, that you might understand that the indulgence which we have granted in matters of religion to the Christians is ample and unconditional, and perceive at the same time that the open and free exercise of their respective religions is granted to all others, as well as to the Christians. For it befits the well-ordered state and the tranquillity of our times that each individual be allowed, according to his own choice, to worship the divinity, and we mean not to derogate aught from the honour due to any religion or its votaries. Moreover, with respect to the Christians, we formerly gave certain orders concerning the places appropriated for their religious assemblies, but now we will that all persons who have purchased such places, either from our exchequer or from any one else, do restore them to the Christians without money demanded or price claimed, and that this be performed peremptorily and unambiguously, and we will also that they who have obtained any right to such places by form of gifts do forthwith restore them to the Christians, reserving all way to such persons who have either purchased for a price or gratuitously acquired them, to make application to the judge of the district if they look in themselves as entitled to any equivalent form of our beneficence. All those places are, by your intervention, to be immediately restored to the Christians. And because it appears that, besides the places appropriated to religious worship, the Christians did possess other places which belonged not to individuals, but to their society in general, that is, to their churches, we comprehend all such within the regulation aforesaid, and we will that you cause them all to be restored to the society of churches, and that without hesitation or controversy, provided always that the persons making restitution without a price paid shall be at liberty to seek indemnification from our bounty. In furthering all which things for the behoof of the Christians, you are to use your utmost diligence to the end that our orders be speedily obeyed, and our gracious purpose in securing the public tranquillity promoted, so that divine favour which, in the affairs of the mightiest importance, we have already experienced, continue to give success to us, and in our successes make the commonweal happy, and that the tenor of this our gracious ordinance may be made known unto all, we will that you cause it by your authority to be published everywhere. End quote. Care was taken in this edict to speak of all other religions as included in its provisions. However, since all were licensed and content with that status, it made no difference to their status. The object of the edict was the Christian Church. Several emphases are very obvious in the text, and all need to be cited to do justice to it. First, the primary concern is plainly stated, quote, the good and the security of the commonweal, end quote. The welfare of Rome now dictated that the Christians, a very considerable body of believers, be included in the life of Rome. It no longer made sense to wage war on so important a group. The edict was thus clearly pragmatic to some degree. The step was described as, quote, highly consonant with right reason, end quote, and thus a sound administrative decision. Second, the freedom or indulgence granted to the Christians is described by the Edict as, quote, ample and unconditional, end quote. It was freedom for, quote, the open and free exercise, end quote, of their faith. The Edict places no qualifying clause on the freedom of the Church, nor did it intend to. It was a treaty of peace, and the Church had won. Rome saved face while surrendering to the Church. Some have viewed this step in terms of subsequent attempts to control the Church. This is to misread history, and also to ascribe to Constantine a long-term plan and policy. The simple fact is that freedom was granted. Moreover, a radical step was taken in that not only was the freedom of the Church recognized, but all individuals. A radical break with the past, quote, at the same time, the open and free exercise of their respective religions is granted to all others as well as to the Christians, for it befits the well-ordered states and the tranquillity of our times that each individual be allowed, according to his own choice, to worship the divinity, end quote. This meant the freedom of religion for all. The pagan cults were content with the old settlements and had no desire for freedom. Freedom was now the right of individuals and groups. Third, restitution was ordered. All previously expropriated and confiscated church buildings were to be restored. The states would compensate the present owners. At the same time, the immunity and restoration was made to include all Christian organization and agencies. There was thus freedom for what some now call parachurch organizations. Fourth, we come to a significant aspect of the Edict which can no more be ignored than can its pragmatism. Constantine speaks of the experience of, quote, the divine favor, end quote. The reference is not specifically Christian. It is quite possible or likely that Constantine's religious experience, whatever it was, had a syncretistic character. The fact is that the Christians were the beneficiaries of it, which tells us where Constantine saw the source of the divine favor to be. Neither in the Edict nor subsequently was any other religion a beneficiary. However pragmatic and however much dictated by circumstances, the Edict of Milan is a landmark in the history of religious liberty. Subsequently, confusion entered in. Constantine gave subsidies to some churchmen. He entered into matters of church discipline. He legislated in favor of the church, and so on. However much men today may deplore some of these steps, it is important to recognize that both Constantine and the church of his day saw the matter differently. The difference then between the emperor as a man and the emperor as the head of the state was a vague line, if at all a line. The imperial and personal treasury of the ruler was essentially the same. The emperor's concerns easily became state concerns. Both Constantine and the church saw his actions as evidences of personal concern and friendliness. Because he was their great friend, it was easy to rely on him. As a result, what began in the Edict as religious liberty became in time the toleration and establishment of the church alone, to the exclusion of other religions, and then to the exclusion of heretics. This led to the struggle by Arians and other heretics to gain this status of establishment and to exclude the Orthodox, as in the days of Athanasius. Toleration always means also intolerance. If a particular religion or branch of a religion is tolerated, then the state has set the tenable grounds of existence. It can, by law, exclude every group which does not meet those tenable grounds. Whenever the state says which church or cult can exist, it thereby establishes that particular group and excludes others. A pattern was thus set which had repercussions in the history of the West to the present.